top hats and mutton shoes, erotic intense midnight cruise, Berlin gay society in 1903. Sigmund Freud's Vienna's hype identifies the homo type, the intermediate sex, and heterodoxy. The gay wave moves across the sea. Hello, there is liberty. Betty Boop is hot and hooches out in the cold. Greenwich Village, Bloomsbury, gays in high society. Harlem night, Chicago fights, Leopold and Loeb. Pride, gotta have pride. Better run too long to keep it inside. Pride, can't sit back and watch from the side. Pride is power and power is pride. It's time to celebrate all the colors of the rainbow. Get out into the streets, follow the tide.
I'm Brian McNaught, and this is Stonewall Portraits, Profiles in Pride, a short half-hour oral history of some of the people who have made an extraordinary difference in the lives of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. And our special guest today is my friend, Richard Burns. Richard Burns, who I love. Richard Burns recently was inducted into the Public Interest Hall of Fame in 2008, which is no small honor, because of his 23 years of service to the community as executive director of the New York City Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Community Center. He's the longest serving executive director of any national gay organization. We're going to talk about that 23 years. But before we do, Richard was a graduate of Hamilton College in Clinton, New York. Hamilton College is a writers' college with only 1,800 students on 1,300 acres. He got his law degree from Northeastern University School of Law. He was managing editor of Gay Community News, a Boston-based national gay news magazine from 1978 to 1980. He was the co-founder of GLAAD, a Boston-based law group called Gay, Lesbian Advocates and Defenders. He was the co-founder of that in 1978 and served with them until 1986. He headed up the Gay Community Center in New York from 1986 to 2009. He's the founder of Centerlink, which is an organization of other community centers. He founded that in 1994 and served on it until 2009. He's on the steering committee of the National Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Executive Directors Institute. He's on the policy roundtable of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. He's the founder of the New York Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Health and Human Services Network. And he is now Chief Operating Officer of Arcus Foundation, which is a charitable foundation which gives its money primarily to gay groups and to groups studying primates, based in Michigan. His partner's name is Bobby. Pretty good so far?
Very good. Lots of time on the internet, Brian.
Good. Yes, I did. I do my research. Well, I want folks to get the sketch, to find out why, why would we, Richard Burns is not necessarily a household name, because, which is stupid in every time the Advocate comes out with its list of the 100 most important people, or Out magazine, your name is not there, and it should be constantly. Because you have been this moving force, part of the gay mafia, right, since you were just a college graduate.
Well, thanks,
right? Yeah. Tell me, if you would, let's start with your family. Are you from New York?
I was born in Manhattan, right in New York, yes, and grew up in Manhattan, Westchester, Long Island, or the whole metro region, and left that to go to school at Hamilton, as you mentioned. And when I was in snowy Hamilton, as one of, there were very few openly gay men at that point there. More lesbians were out in the 70s there. I learned about the Gay Community News.
Were you out in college?
I came out as a sophomore in college.
Oh, as a sophomore,
yeah.
And that was 19...
That was 78.
78.
Yeah.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I was the oldest of 4 sons, yes.
4 sons. And what did your mom and dad do? Did your
Well, I didn't come out to them until right after I graduated.
But their profession, what do they do for work?
My dad was an attorney,
Uh-huh.
and my mom was a legal secretary.
Uh-huh.
And, yeah.
And did they have aspirations for you?
I think they just wanted us to be happy guys, productive, active in society.
So why did you go to Hamilton College? Because it's a college specifically for writers.
Well, one of its strengths
Yeah.
is writing, but it's a liberal arts college and I was interested in writing, but I was also a singer in choirs.
Oh.
And they had a great choir, and I went and visited and hung out with the folks in the choir, and I thought, all right, this is where I want to go. Also, it's a very beautiful campus.
Well, 1,300 acres on
Yeah.
the top,
Very
overlooking
beautiful.
Clinton, New York.
Yeah.
Did you sing through choir all the way through college?
I did.
Uh-huh.
I did, and then when I got to Boston as well.
You sang in the gay men's, was there
No,
a gay men's chorus
There was
yet?
a gay men's chorus. No, I sang in a choir, the Memorial Church Choir in Cambridge, which was an excellent choir and a lot of fun.
Do you still sing?
No. When I moved to New York,
Why'd you stop?
when I joined the center in December of '86, I just became married to that job for a long time.
You did.
Really overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And engaged, and that was my focus for a lot of years.
Just to give folks an idea, the center today gets about 45,000 hits a month on the internet, and when you took over, it had like 30 groups maybe that were asking for space. The basic foundation of the center is to provide affordable space, right,
Well,
to groups, and there are like
it's a
300 now?
It's a multi-service organization that provides a home to LGBT organizations. It also provides social services. There's a licensed treatment program around alcohol and drug abuse, youth services, senior activities, cultural programs, advocacy, both organizing in Albany, New York, around City Hall, and in Washington. So it's one of the 10 largest LGBT organizations in the country, and it's open 365 days a year, 9 a.m. to 11 p.m., and more than 5,000 people walk through its doors on 13th Street in Greenwich Village each and every week. So it's a real hub
By
of
and large,
organizing.
due to your efforts.
Well, there's many people.
No, I know that, but you're an exceedingly humble person, so we're having to let everyone know that, because you're not going to agree with any of my accolades. But you really did marry that group, that organization, and you fathered it, mothered it through its growth. How long have you and Bobby been together?
We've been together about 8.5 years.
Okay, so he came in towards the end of your, yes, that maybe sort of helped you spend less time at the center.
Exactly.
Because you had more demands on your heart. But going back, if I can, when you came out as a sophomore, what was your folks' reaction to that, and what were your brothers' reactions to it?
Well, I came out to my brothers first, and they, I don't think they were thrilled. I think, when you're at that age, they were all younger than I was. It was sort of like, what does it reflect on them?
Right.
But none of them...
and who are you going to tell?
Yes.
Are our friends going to find out?
And ultimately, they were all fine. I mean, none of them had a big negative reaction. And I waited until I graduated to come out to my folks.
And your brothers didn't tell in that time?
I think in various fights they probably did.
Yeah.
But, we never talked about it until I came out of graduated from college. But they actually were pretty supportive right away.
Did your dad want you to be an attorney?
I don't think he was quite that directional, but yes, he was a lawyer, and he was perfectly happy if we all became lawyers. But I didn't do that right away. As you know, I worked at the Gay Community News for a number of years before I decided to.
Did they have any feelings
law
about
school.
you being in a chorus? I mean, our oldest son is singing.
Well, my mom always sang in choirs,
Uh-huh.
and so I think they thought it was fine.
Okay.
I don't think they thought that much
No, it
about
didn't question your
No.
masculinity at all with that?
No, not at all.
You're a tall guy. Did you get any pressure to play basketball when you were in high school
Not from
and
my
college?
folks, certainly from the school.
Yeah.
But once they saw my lack of coordination, they backed off pretty quickly.
Go sing.
Exactly.
You're better in chorus.
Exactly. Be in the school play.
So while in college, you heard about Gay Community News because you came out as a sophomore. Was there an organized gay group at Hamilton at the time?
It started around 78.
Okay.
A group of lesbians organized it. It was called Sappho. And they posted a sign in the dining hall, and I remember looking at it and thinking, well, this could either be a poetry group
Yes.
or it's a gay activist group. And so I went, and indeed, about a dozen people were there, and it was brand new, first meeting, and it was really a lifeline for me at a very conservative school in the early 70s.
Were you politically conservative at the time?
No, I don't think I was ever politically conservative, but I wasn't an activist until that time.
Yeah, what happened? How did you become an activist? Because when I'm telling you this, because when I met, I'm the mayor's liaison to the gay community, and of all the people at Gay Community News, you were the one who, for me, was like an altar boy. Now, don't be offended, but you were this clean-cut, very polite, right, seemingly reasonable person, and there was a part of me that wanted to protect you. How did you go from this nice family to, I mean, Gay Community News, and you being editor and president of the, it was one of the most radical voices in the gay community nationally.
Sure.
How did you, were you ever feel isolated? Were you ever feeling like you weren't radical enough in the group?
Well, no. Working at and being a part of the collective at Gay Community News was a great education in politics and ideology. And it was there were weekly collective meetings every Tuesday night, and they could go on for 4 hours. And there could be 40 people in the room, packed into that room on the second floor at 22 Bromfield Street. And it was an education in the sense that people would argue about, is abortion a gay issue? And it would go back and forth, and being a witness and a part of those conversations was an education. It was a dialectic, and really it was a place where people agreed to disagree.
Did you sit and listen, or did you go out and put in your 2 cents?
Probably in the very beginning I sat and listened.
Yeah, you look like a listener initially to me.
But soon, you can't help but find your voice. And then you're organizing demonstrations. And
who was your role model at that time?
Well,
did you have, there were people out that you looked at and thought?
Certainly there was a group of folks who were a generation ahead of me at the paper, people like Neil Miller, who you know, Harry Will Sang, were people who were just 6, 7, 8 years older than me. But when I was 22, that was a lot.
Yeah.
And they were living a gay life in Boston, and that, so I sort of learned how I could do that. And
that became your family.
Oh, sure, in a way, yeah. Yeah, I'm still friends with all those folks.
Well, again, you were all very tight, and you really did all go off and head off all of these different organizations. So you're editor of Gay Community News, and which is a really important job, especially in Boston. Boston's the hub of a lot of political activity. And this is a common question I ask, so when you're laying in bed at night and you think about, the day that you die, if you do that yet, you will when you're my age, and so the obit's written, what's the lead?
Well, if I think of the points in my journey where I feel the most contentment and pride and yearning to have done more, it would be my tenure at the Community Center in New York and my involvement at the Gay Community News, and GLAAD, certainly.
And let's talk a second about GLAAD, because it's such an important organization. It and Lambda Legal Defense are the two major, well, there's also the Lesbian...
National Center for Lesbian Rights.
Right, yes, 3 major groups that take on cases of significance, take them to the Supreme Court, argue on behalf of the community, only really taking cases that have significance for others. Is that right?
Correct. Impact litigation.
Right, impact litigation. And you founded that with John Ward, did you?
Well, there were 4 or 5 of us in a church basement on Beacon Hill, the basement of Old West Church, in the fall of '78. And John Ward is really the driving force.
I remember John well.
He had just an amazing vision
sweet man,
that he had. And there were 5 of us, Roberta Stone, Cindy Rizzo, John, myself, who sat in that basement and organized GLAAD. And GLAAD really came in response to the Suffolk County District Attorney election. Garrett Byrne was the Suffolk County DA in the late 70s, and as part of a re-election tactic, I don't know if you, I'm sure you remember, he concocted and used the Boston Herald American to promote it, this idea of a Boston sex ring, the Revere sex ring, where
Right.
gay men were preying on young people. And there really was no ring, but it was a way to fan fear about gay people and gay men. And really, the Herald American, day after day, would have these front page homophobic stories. And there was a group called the Boston Boise Committee that was formed at Gay Community News as a physical space where people came together to fight back against this damage to the reputation and image and safety of the lesbian and gay community.
Before you go on, if I can, Boise was used because the same thing happened in
Boise, Idaho in the 50s.
where they rounded up men. They kept talking about this group that was having sex with others.
And it
So-
turned out to all be a fabrication.
Right.
But meanwhile, certain men committed suicide. And Neil Miller wrote a book about it, actually, about Boise.
Yes.
But the Boston Boise Committee was an ad hoc activist group to organize protests, demonstrations against Garrett Byrne's attack on our community. And when that all settled down, you realized how defenseless we were as a community in that kind of situation. And GLAAD was the natural response out of that organizing. And so John, who'd been a lead lawyer active with Boston Boise Committee, had this idea for a New England-based legal defense and litigation organization, and so called this meeting. And we were sitting there in this church basement at Old West, and he said, "Well, Richard, you're going to be president, and Roberta, you'll be treasurer or whatever." And so we incorporated and went after our 501c3 tax-exempt status. And today, as you know, GLAAD established the right for marriage equality for lesbian and gay people in Massachusetts. It's really a remarkable organization, and it came out of that moment of crisis in our community in the late 70s.
Well, I was on the first board of directors of
I remember.
GLAAD with Charlie Shively sitting across from me,
Uh-huh.
the man who burned the Bible, and me
Uh-huh.
across from each other, and it was just a fledgling group. And
Right.
then now clearly you're very sophisticated. But did GLAAD precede Lambda, or was Lambda in existence when GLAAD?
Lambda started in the early 70s in New York, and just as GLAAD was focused on New England, Lambda was focused on New York.
Okay.
And it was not until 1980 that the Lambda board decided they were going to become a national organization. And so they suddenly recruited a national board, and actually Margot Carl, the late Margot Carl, who was an attorney and the president of the Lambda Legal Board at that time, recruited me as their New England board member in the fall of '80.
I want to go to the community center, but before we do, when you Google gay community news, what comes up consistently, regrettably from my perspective, is the article Gay Revolutionary that was published in 1987. You remember the piece that is,
See, I was already in New York by then, and so
All
I
right,
thought, my
well,
gosh, I
this
should
is-
Google GCN.
Michael Swift,
Uh-huh.
you'll remember this, wrote the article Gay Revolutionary in 1987, in which he said, "We shall sodomize your sons." You know this?
I remember this,
All right.
sure.
Well, this is now constantly used by the right wing as saying this is our agenda, that we will sodomize your sons, we'll seduce them in the schools. And this was read into the congressional record, so this exists in the congressional record. Would you have published it?
Well, it would depend on whether or not it was a guest.
It was, and it was an op-ed piece.
And I'll tell you, the paper's policy at that time was very sort of First Amendment oriented. You could really take almost any position in those op-eds. So I imagine there would have been vigorous debate, and I don't know. that I would have in
You've never read the piece?
1987. I probably did at the time, but
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
already at the Center in New York at that point, and I was so engaged there. I wasn't that focused on Boston anymore.
Well, in fairness to the author, he says in the beginning, this essay is a ultra madness, a tragic, cruel fantasy, an eruption of inner rage, and how the oppressed desperately dream of being the oppressor. But that never got read into the...
Sure.
That was the lead, but that's
Sure.
never been quoted. They just published
Sure.
his rage. So, okay, so you went to the Gay Community Center, and it was a fledgling group, really, at the time. The building was bought for $1.5 million. It was an old school
Right.
in New York, and you came in after it was 3 years old when you came in, right? You came in
Right.
86, it started in 83.
Right, correct.
And so you were there for 23 years.
22, but yes.
22
Yes,
years.
yes, and it was a great experience and really an honor to work there.
Did you get burned out?
Well, I was certainly ready to leave
Yeah.
when I did, but I'm so proud of the folks who are still there, and the new executive director, Glenda Testone, is was an excellent choice and has really hit the ground running. And the center is a center of activism. I mean, it's the place where ACT UP was founded, and where Queer Nation, Lesbian Avengers, everything, even organizations that are around today that are quite important, like Immigration Equality, was founded at this center.
But the Harvey Milks, the Hetrick Martin Harvey Milk School was also based there initially, and Dignity
while.
went there.
When the Catholic Archdiocese threw Dignity out of the churches,
Right.
in the 80s, Dignity came to the center to hold their services there.
So you have a
Certainly.
building here. In one room you have Dignity, and the other one you have ACT Out,
Right.
right, and Queer Nation. So that's not unlike what you tried to achieve with Gay Community News.
Well, you're one of the few people to figure that out, Brian,
Yeah.
but absolutely. For me, it was about almost being an architect, creating an infrastructure for activism, cultural celebration, social services, and a place where people who are just struggling with their identity as a queer person, coming out as a lesbian, or more often today, struggling with their gender identity. A safe place where, whether you're a kid or middle-aged, you can do that and plug into all the variety of our community, whether it's the Gay Men's Chorus or the square dancing group or a political organization. We want to create spaces where that's all there for you, and where you're supported, and then you in turn, when you're feeling strong and proud, then it's your turn to give back to the next group of folks.
If you go
coming
get a
out.
space on your own, is the hope that people will go find, because what you provide is low rent to groups that can't afford to rent expensive space in New York.
Sure.
Is the hope that they will eventually find their own space?
Not necessarily, certainly in some cases, but I think that everyone is enriched by having a grand central station for LGBT community, where you can walk in and find it all, and they feed off one another. I mean, you might walk in to hear Stephen Macaulay reading from his new book, and run into Amy Hoffman promoting her book, and go read that. You know, I mean, it's a cross-fertilization.
Is there any
all the
athletics
time.
there? Is there a gym?
Sure.
or-
Well, there's not a gym, but there's certainly athletic groups meet there, recruit there, hold their social events there. Absolutely.
I've been to the center just a couple times, but for me, one of the exciting things was seeing the Keith Haring painting in the men's room. Is that not?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Pretty.
yeah.
I mean, was that during your time?
Sure.
He came in. Did you get him to do that?
In, when was it? 89.
Yeah.
We were celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and we commissioned 50 artists, 25 men and 25 women, to do site-specific installations throughout the building, right on the walls.
That's great.
And Keith Haring was one of them, and we said to the artists, where do you want to do it? And he said, oh my God, nobody says that. I want the men's room.
So you didn't tell him you've got the men's room.
No. He picked that, and
Wow.
it's one of the only herring environments in New York.
It's incredible. It's really incredible. Before we go to the work that you're doing with the Arcus Foundation, because you're the chief operating officer of that
Yeah.
group, and that's based in Michigan. You don't have to live in Michigan to be...
Well, no, Arcus actually has 3 offices.
Oh, it does?
The original office.
The foundation sponsor was a Michigan resident, was it?
Our
Was he not?
president and founder, John Stryker, absolutely
Stryker, yeah.
lives in a variety of places, but his family is from Kalamazoo, and the original office is in Kalamazoo, but Arcus has an office in New York
Okay.
and also in Cambridge, England.
And so, in Cambridge, England.
Uh-huh.
No, so they support gay issues in Cambridge. I thought things had to be Michigan, or no?
No, the foundation supports LGBT work both in the United States and around the world.
Okay.
But has a very specific focus tying that work to racial justice, to religion and values, and then internationally supports organizing on a more local level. But in the domestic U.S. sector, it's really focused on national impact work. And it's all very long-term, tied to a rigorous strategic plan. It's quite
What do you do
focused.
with them? I mean, I don't. What does COO mean? What's your job?
Well, it's many of the things I did at the center in overseeing all of the non-grant making aspects of the organization.
So you have nothing to do with, if I asked you for money, you couldn't give it to
No,
me?
just
No.
I'm involved at the strategic planning level,
Okay.
not at the grant making level. I'm happy to say.
Which allows you to not have to deal with
Yeah.
people looking for money.
Yeah.
Do you like it?
I love it. I love it. It was the perfect segue for me, and it's a very exciting place to be in. A group of 30 really smart, committed individuals who are very, very focused on long-term change.
When you were at the community center, you got invited to be on every group that met, and anytime anybody met, you probably were in the White House. I mean, will you get the same entree from the Arcus Foundation?
Well, it's different. I'm in a very different role. Being in philanthropy is different than being at an activist organization, and any kind of social justice movement, everybody has their role. You're out in the streets, you're writing op-eds, or you're lobbying,
Right.
and so we're all in our different.
Right.
But it takes all of this to create a movement.
And you've been so much apart. Can I talk about Bobby for a minute? You've been
Sure.
together for 8 years. Your folks and family embrace him completely.
Absolutely.
And his family, you?
They're great. They're
And-
great. Macon, Georgia. is where
In
he's
Macon,
from.
Georgia. Have you
Yeah.
actually been married? Have you married?
No, no,
Okay.
no.
Any
no.
desire to do that?
Well, I certainly fight for the right for marriage equality.
All right, you sound like Kate Nervous. Have you two had this discussion over the table?
But I want, I love Bobby and want to spend my life with him,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't necessarily want to copy the nuclear family to that degree. But not to say I won't change my mind.
Right.
But
I didn't. Ray and I got married in Canada right after it was possible. It was amazing to us what a powerful experience it was to
Yeah.
actually sign something in City Hall and to actually be able to say the words. Not that we want to model our relationship on the traditional heterosexual model, but it was pretty cool to, after all
Yeah.
those years, to have somebody from the state actually recognize. We had a civil union in Vermont. So just a thought,
Yeah.
but you're happy, and
Yeah.
that's all that matters. And what in Bobby's work is he?
He's a set designer
Uh-huh.
of television and film.
Able to be
and-
out and
Oh, sure,
And do
sure.
your two work schedules complement each other?
For the most part,
Yeah.
we're fine. Yeah.
So looking back after all what you did, the community center really and Gay Community News, and both of them are interrelated in terms of your design of what you think the gay community ought to be offering people, is
Sure.
an opportunity to express themselves regardless of where they are in the continuum, the political continuum, gender continuum, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and I think that today, places like the community center, institutions in our movement, they're always changing and evolving. There are many opportunities made available by the election of Barack Obama. things that weren't possible for 8 years in this country. Now there are opportunities not only to make change through Congress, but through executive action. Many things that can be done at the cabinet level, at the executive order level. So our community's activism right now can take a leap by affecting federal policy, which then, of course, has an impact, a huge impact on the lives of millions and millions of people. And at the same time, other needs are emerging in our community. Many, many more people are having children by choice. And so our movement is focusing on families. Transgender people are coming into their own and coming out in greater and greater numbers. And so our community is taking up that fight more than ever to fight for gender identity protections as well as sexual orientation protections. And so our movement evolves and our institutions have to evolve with them, and they're doing it.
This is why Richard Burns is on this program. He is, for me and for the rest of us, a model of pride in our community. I thank you for what is too brief a time, but you are an exceptional person, no longer a young man. But I love you, and I'm so grateful for everything that you've done.
Well, thanks for having me, Brian.
Yeah.
Gotta have pride. Been around too long to keep it inside. Pride. Can't sit back and watch from the side.